Okay, in this lecture we're going to talk about layers in Photoshop. So all the edits that you do in Camera Raw are non-destructive because they have instructions assigned to the file and they don't actually move pixels around. But let's assume you've processed a file out and you're ready to work on it in Photoshop for some more refined edits. And what that means is you're now actually pushing pixels around. So these are destructive edits. Fortunately, there's a way to minimize those edits from being too destructive. And the way to do that is through layers. And conceptually, you can think of layers as almost like transparencies that are layered on top of one another that you can see through, and they affect each other. So over here on the left, you can see kind of an example of that and what that looks like. So let's jump over here to a case study. So in this file, we've got at the very bottom a background layer, as you always do when you bring a file in. The first thing you want to do is copy that background layer into a new layer. So you can do that by pressing Command J on your keyboard, or you can drag that file down to this plus sign down here and get it that way too. You can also delete layers by clicking and dragging them down to the trash can icon, or just by clicking and pressing delete on your keyboard. But the first layer you should have is a copy of your background. The next layer, if you're working in color, or black and white for that matter, is to set up a white balance layer so that you have a point of reference to work from. So in this layer designates white as what it should look like and black as what it should look like, and within the printable range. So after that, if you're working in color, you should then balance the colors. So that was kind of a minimal edit. You can see that I just added some cyan here into the red. It was a little bit too red to begin with, so I just added some cyan. And let's say I have a layer for the sky. I have a layer for the house. I have a layer where I decided I wanted to see it in black and white, so let's take a look at that. And the best way really to get to a black and white image is to take a color photograph and then convert it with either a layer in Photoshop or in Camera Raw. But you get all of the ability to affect all of these color channels up here when you use a black and white layer. And the very last layer that you should have in your workflow is a sharpening layer, which is registered perfectly for your image. So if you do that before you're ready to output or save your file and you change some stuff, it may not register exactly and it might throw you off a little bit. So it's always the last thing you do before you go to print or to save your file. The advantage of working with layers is that they're flexible, as we mentioned before, but there are layer properties that we can work with. So one of those properties is, for instance, opacity. You can decide to make a layer more or less transparent. So here that has the effect on the black and white layer of just removing saturation. So if we totally desaturate that layer or make it totally transparent, we can see all the way through it. And if we turn it all the way up, we can see it blocks out the layers below it and you can see the black and white. And also you have the option to turn the previews on and off with the eyeball icon. If you want to turn them all on or all off, you can just click and drag down the column of eyeball icons and it'll turn them all off. You can turn them all back on. And here you can see I've got a text layer there. And what you can do there is if you've got pixels on a layer that you want to move around, you can do that by pressing the Move tool up here or pressing V on your keyboard, and you can then move that around. Just like that. And if you decide you want to make it bigger, you can. You can go to Edit, Transform, and you have all kinds of options under here for how to manipulate layers as well. So you can scale it up or down from there. Let's make it bigger. If you're working with a text layer, you have some other options that you can think about. You can add effects by clicking this effects icon down at the bottom. And let's go to stroke. So I've got all these effects already on this layer, and you can see that like on the drop down shadow layer, you can affect the direction of the shadow. You can affect the distance of the shadow and how big it is, how sharp it is, the size of it. And one neat thing is that it remembers all of those settings. So if you want to copy all of that to a new text layer, you can. I can press Command J and copy all of that to a new layer, and then move that, and then click on the icon. Always clicking on the icon takes you to the adjustments for that layer. And you can see that it remembered those settings. So basically, if I go here, I can see that it's all the same settings as the one before, but we can change that a little bit and make it a little bit different. And one other thing to talk about is the fill. And the fill refers to the actual pixel content on a layer. So we just made some, applied some effects to that layer, and if we want to drain the pixel content out of there, we can. And basically, what we're left with are the effects that we applied to that layer. So here, we can do the same thing. It looks a little bit different. So that is about covers all the layer properties. Once you've been working with a lot of layers and you've got a lot of them stacked up in a project, they all start to, viewing them becomes an issue. So you might want to go over here to this flyout menu with the bars on it and click Panel Options. And if you want to make it smaller, each thumbnail smaller, you can. Then you can see all of them easier. But if you don't have many layers, you may want to make those thumbnails larger. And you can also organize your layers to help you with a project. So for instance, you can take these two text layers and group them together by pressing on Command G on your keyboard or Layer Group Layers. That will group those layers together. And I can name that group and say text. And when I turn the eyeball on and off on the group, it affects both layers within there. And I can also change the opacity and affect both layers within that group. So if you've got a lot of layers within a group and you want to make them all transparent at once instead of trying to dial that in one at a time, that's a great way to do it. And also, one way to help yourself stay organized is to label your layers. So let's go ahead and change the thumbnail size so we can see that. But I like to label them for their purpose. So This layer takes care of white balance. This is for color balance. This layer affects the sky. This one the house. This one's for black and white. This one's for sharpening. So I find that helpful also. All right. Thank you very much.